right. So good morning, everyone. My name is Kiruthika. I'm the Deputy Director of Education Programs at Science Center Singapore. So as all of you know, the Science Center is a museum in Jurong. And the role of the Science Center is to get people excited about science. And we do this in many ways. The most common way and the way in which most of us see is through our exhibitions. And the most recent exhibitions that we've been working on are exhibitions like, the energy story, which just opened last year, where we talk about how Singapore works with energy, how we generate energy, how we make sure that we are sustainable in terms of our energy usage. But at the same time, we also do some really fun exhibitions like the phobia exhibition. If you've been to the Science Center in the last 3 to 4 years, you would have seen the phobia exhibition, which is a exhibition that looks at why we feel afraid and what are the things that people are afraid of. And those exhibitions are really interactive. And some of you who've been recently to the Science Center would know that in the phobia exhibition, there are spaces where you can kind of crawl through dark spaces or spaces where you're kind of squashed. So you get the feeling of claustrophobia or you look at the fear of darkness, and among other things that people are afraid of. And we use the exhibitions at the Science Center as a way to communicate science to the general public. But my department specifically works on programs. And by programs, that means that we do lab lessons for students. So when students come to the Science Center, they typically come to one of our labs. And in the labs, they end up doing all kinds of experiments. So my favorite program that we do for students of, primary level is a program called Water Rockets. And one of the ways we do this program is actually to look at how when you put a lot of pressure into a bottle, something like this, and then you launch it and you can see how far it flies. And those are things that you would not be able to do. You can do them at home, but it takes a significant amount of work to do them at home. So we kind of do a lot of work in preparing these equipment and materials so that when students come for these programs, they would be able to do all these experiments or learn something a little bit different from what they would usually learn in home or in school. So what I actually wanted to share with you was more why am I at the Science Center? And maybe before I do that, the reason why I'm actually at the Science Center is because I really like the idea of STEM. And maybe I can ask you guys, what do you think is STEM? And you can put your answers either in the chat box, or if you want to unmute yourself, you can just put up your hand and Adam will let you know if you can unmute yourself. Right. So what do you think is the meaning of STEM?
It's a part of a plant.
Okay, that's a good one. All right, it's the part of plant. Any other guesses?
Science, technology, engineering, and mathematics.
So the acronym, so STEM is actually an acronym for science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. And let me kind of see what my next slide is. It's a little bit early in the morning here, so I'm half asleep still. No, I'm not half asleep still. Okay, so it is, so my question to you would be, why is it important for us to know science, technology, engineering, and mathematics? And again, if you want to type it in the chat, you can, or if not, you can just unmute yourself and tell. No right or wrong answer here. So.
Oh, in the chat. Learn problem solving. Carlton
Mhm.
asked learn problem solving.
Yeah. Yeah, it is a way to solve problems, yes, but why science? I mean, you can always solve problems with, I don't know, learning geography or something. So why science, technology? I mean, why maths? I mean, I know everyone does maths in school, and you're like, I'm sorry, what exactly am I doing this for? Why do I have to learn long division? Or yeah. So Kaylin says maths is everywhere around us, so it's important to know it. Sure thing, yes, of course. You need to know some sort of math, but why do you have to know, for example, algebra? You know, any thoughts really why? Or and when we say no engineering or no technology, I mean everyone knows how to use a smartphone, but why do we actually need to learn why a smartphone works or how it works? So this is something that I kind of want you guys to think about, because STEM is something. So if you read the newspapers or if you read any, you know, most of the time nowadays, especially in the newspapers, you would see quite a lot of articles about STEM, that the government is interested in all of us, a lot of children, students especially, getting to learn science, technology, engineering, mathematics, and not just to learn science, because we've all been learning science in school, at least I have, and I'm quite old. So, but to sort of learn it in a more applied way. So when we learn science, we would usually learn, maybe we can just take a common topic that you guys learn in school for science. Maybe you would learn about photosynthesis, and you know how why plants produce food. But that's maybe you would learn about it in terms of what is required by the plants to produce food, how do plants store food, which kind of plants store food, in which parts of their which part of the plant, and so on and so forth. But there is, but if you incorporate, say, technology into learning science, okay, what you might do is you might measure the amount of light that is, and you could use a data logger, for example, and you might look at how technology can enable to better learn your science. So for instance, you might do a sort of a time-lapse video of how your plant is growing over time, that kind of makes you understand how much food it's producing from the time it germinates to the time it, say, makes a fruit, for instance. Or that's one way in which you could use technology to learn about science. But you could also use engineering to see if you can make your plants grow better. For instance, you could, a nice project that I've seen, this is actually a really funny project, is a project called the pot pet. And the pot pet is a little plant that sits on two wheels, and it would run around looking for light. So if it's out of light, it kind of senses that it doesn't have light, and it would run finding where the light is sitting. So that is a bit of an application, although it's a little bit funny. It's a little bit of an application for you to learn how you can use engineering to improve the way your plant grows. And finally, you come to the mathematics, and mathematics is all about maybe measuring how your plant grows, or sensing the value of the light a plant receives so that it grows optimally in the best conditions. So let me sort of try to formalize this, because I really like to do this. And okay, maybe before I do that, I want to maybe continue a little bit this conversation about why STEM is important. Okay. And I can perhaps ask you, because we know that, okay, so we are kind of out of the pandemic now, a little bit. But one of the things that I saw, early on in 2020 was who's the most unappreciated person during the pandemic. There were a lot of people who were doing a lot of very important work. And when we talk about the pandemic, who was doing a lot of work, we often think of people like the healthcare workers. So did you know, or do you want to guess who was doing some very, very important work? Cleaners. Yeah, but we did talk about cleaners. We did have SG Clean and things like that. Anyone wants to guess any other? Well, there is a correct answer that I'm looking for, but of course, there are a lot of people who were very important during the pandemic. I'm just trying to see if anyone can give me a guess on, given that I'm talking about science and technology over here, who do you think was a very important person who we really never talked about? And in fact, they were so important that when everyone was working at home, these people couldn't work at home. So even though you would think they're able to. Any guesses?
The social workers?
Certainly social workers, but again, that's not the answer I'm looking at. Lab scientists, not really. Maybe I can just go on and say that for everyone who was working at home, we couldn't have worked from home without these people. So again, coming back to that, that's as good a clue as I could give you. So we were all working from home. We were working from home because we could, and the reason why we could was because these people were not able to work from home. And nope, not at all. So nurses, doctors, people trying to find the vaccines, they were working to stop the pandemic, or at least to improve matters a bit. But the fact that they were there, technologists is a good, close enough suggestion, but only a specific group of technologists. Any idea who they are?
Internet people.
Oh, very good. That's good. So not quite internet people, but the people who actually work in the server rooms, so we are here and we are using the internet and doing all our Zoom meetings. At least the adults would know what I'm talking about, because and also you guys, because you were doing homeschool. I think most of you are homeschooled, but those of you who are not homeschooled, you're doing schools online and quite a lot of stuff. And most of the time, you wouldn't be able to do this if your servers are not running. And it was quite, it was not a surprise, but it was a little bit of an awakening to me at the Science Center when all of us were working from home, and we were having this meeting on Zoom, and the IT department and the IT director said, we're not working from home. We're all in the office because, I'm sorry, we have to be here to make sure that your servers are running. And I said, hang on a minute. We're all working here because of technology. And the people who are actually doing the technology are the people who are every day commuting during a time when vaccines were not available and everything. And we never appreciated them. We were appreciating the nurses and the doctors, the cleaners and the scientists, because they were doing stuff. So not everything that happens in STEM is something that's cool and innovative. It's sometimes, actually many times, just a daily grind of things which are often underappreciated but really necessary, and they make the world move around. So let me just talk a little bit. Yeah, so this is the server guy who has been working very hard to make our lives go on. So when I really talk about STEM, and I was talking about why STEM is important, so I actually like to put it in this way. So when we talk about STEM, it's science, technology, engineering, and maths, right? So what is science? Science is actually a process. Okay, so science, sometimes we think, is a bunch of facts that we learn from a textbook that we have to talk about in an exam. Or sometimes when we say, hey, let's do a science experiment, let's get baking soda and vinegar and see it make bubbles. And I think almost all of you would have done that at home. But science is actually a process by which you learn something about the world around you. And if you go, and if you want to go and do something at home, you might want to Google something that's called the scientific process. And that tells you a little bit about how scientists work, right? So what you do then is you would go through the scientific process. So when you look at the world around you, you start with a hypothesis, and then you would do a test. You would design an experiment that would help us to test this hypothesis. You would conduct the experiment. You would verify your hypothesis. And sometimes you would just do this all over again. So any science is not a set of facts, but it is a process. All right. So by virtue of it being a process, any science is something that you can do more of and discover more from. What is technology? Now, technology actually gives us the tool. So remember I told you, if you are doing a science experiment, or you're trying to create an experiment on how a plant grows or how it makes food, and technology would allow you to observe these discoveries by giving you tools. And when I say technology, I don't mean a smartphone, I mean a ruler, right? So if you want to measure something, you may not necessarily use a very big piece of technology. You can use something really simple and basic, and this is still technology. Anything that has come out of innovation is basically a technology, not just a smartphone, right? And engineering actually is an application of these discoveries, and then you make something useful out of it. So a vaccine is not just a science; it's also an engineering. When you create a vaccine, you're creating a whole bunch of things to make this vaccine available for people. So you're making machines that can produce these vaccines in billions of quantities, for example. And maths is a language. So what maths does is it's a way for scientists, engineers to communicate the work that they do between themselves and to the rest of us. And so that other people, so one person can't do science all their lives, and they could, but eventually that knowledge would be lost with them. And maths gives you a language, and that allows people to communicate science, technology, and engineering, right? So I know that I'm running a little bit out of time, so I'm just going to move very quickly through the rest of my slides. And the reason why STEM is important, and I think one of you said this a little bit earlier, is that it helps us to do things better. But in a way, I like to say that STEM actually is transforming careers a lot. And when you guys go out into the workforce, the work that you do will change very much because of STEM. And we know this because, I mean, the world has changed a lot. We use the internet a lot. We live in a world, like people like say, we live in a world that's very connected, very technology oriented. But let's talk about some careers that we usually think are very traditional. Say, for example, farming, right? So if you are a farmer, it's for hundreds of years, people have been just working in the fields and stuff. But now farming has changed a lot through tech. And if you kind of go and Google things like, drones and farming, for example, you would find that people are using very new technologies to increase yield, to do better farming. And this little machine here is called a farm bot. And recently we hosted a talk by the inventors of the farm bot. And what it does is you put your plants, you just let it know what plants to plant, and it plants, just leave it there, and everything gets done for you, and you just eat the food that it produces for you. So something like farming, which is a very traditional sort of an industry, is being changed fundamentally by technology, by STEM. Furniture making, again, carpentry, you would think of it's very traditional, very tool-based work. But now carpenters are using tools like 3D modeling to do more innovative, better designs. I recently read about this Singaporean who is using augmented reality to do better furniture. So it's possible to augment something as traditional as carpentry with STEM. Oh, I love this. So this is, of course, cooking, right? Chefs and what your mom does in the kitchen or whoever cooks for you in the kitchen does something very traditional as well. I mean, bread baking, it's as traditional as it can get. There is this whole area of science and research. It's called gastronomy. So recently when I was and because I'm in Europe now, as Sabrina mentioned to you, I visited this place where they were actually making balls out of wine, and you kind of enclose the wine in this little pack of seaweed so that you can eat cheese and wine together. You guys are a bit young for that, but I'm sure all of you have drunk bubble tea. And when you drink bubble tea, there are some kinds of bubbles that you get which are actually this little bit of seaweed, and inside you've got juice. And when you put that bubbles in your mouth, they kind of pop. So, and that's something that's called molecular gastronomy. So it's a way of making or enclosing liquids into pops. And that's just one way in which you can do really cool things with your food using STEM. And why do you want to do that? Of course, you can make bubble tea, but there are other things you can make with it as well. So even something as traditional as cooking is changing with science and technology. And of course, it has to change with science and technology because the way we eat, the way we consume food changes. I'm sure you've heard of meatless meats, impossible foods that help us to embrace a more sustainable way of living. And that is a product of our labs. So how do you make vegetables and plant-based stuff taste like meat so that more people can become vegetarian? So yeah, so these are things that people are working on even in terms of food. Okay, so as a person who works in the Science Center, we believe in two things. First is that science can inspire us to be innovative and be better people. And the second is that everyone among us can be inspired by STEM and can be empowered by STEM to do something different, regardless of whether you are doing a job that is traditionally considered to be a science job, because you don't have to do a science job to be empowered by science to do cool stuff with it, right? So I just want to show you one video, and I'm just going to stop and share my screen. Okay, so this is a little video that was done by one of my colleagues who works in STEM Inc. And they built a machine to show the different kinds of domains in which science is applied, just to give you an idea of some of the work that we do at the Science Center. So yeah, here we go. Enjoy. I hope I can play it. Let me skip this one. So one thing that we like to do is to tell everyone as much as possible about what's called the Sustainable Development Goals. Again, quick check on the chat. How many of you have heard about the Sustainable Development Goals? Just put it on, put up your hands, and perhaps Adam can let me know how many hands are up.
Yeah, I guess goals around environmental health, about education, about just generally living up, increasing living standards and climate and things like that.
Yeah, kind of. So the reason why I'm sharing about Sustainable Development Goals here is actually because in 2017, all the science centers around the world, we signed a kind of an understanding that wherever it's possible for us to talk about the Sustainable Development Goals, we will do so. So this is a little bit of a plug for the United Nations and the SDGs. So many years ago, the UN came together, which is all the countries in the, well, almost all countries in the world, not all of them, came together to see how they could make the world a better place. Our world is really messed up, in case you haven't realized it. And some of us are contributing to this. Actually, all of us are contributing to this. And when you come out, when you become people, adults going into the workforce, and this is a little bit unfair to you because, you know, our generation has kind of messed up the place and we're handing it to you and saying, fix it. So what we want the world to be in 2030 is a tall order. 2030 is not very far away, it's just 8 years away from today. The UN has said that we are going to work towards a world with no poverty, no hunger, good health that's accessible to everybody, good education that's accessible to everybody, quite a lot of other things, including everyone getting clean water. And again, all of us are in Singapore, and we don't really see the impact of some of these, but there are places in the world, and I think now we are getting a lot more because of the issues in Ukraine, the issues about the pandemic. There are more and more people who have issues getting basic education. So lots of children who have not had access to computers have been kept out of school for the last 2 years. People don't have clean water, people don't have sanitation. Sometimes they don't have safe homes to go to, and these are really important. And the UN has said that by 2030, we should work towards a world where all these goals are met. And there are criteria for all these goals. So one of the things that we do at the Science Center is to develop programs and also to work with partners like the UN who enable us to communicate to people and to get young people such as yourself to appreciate the Sustainable Development Goals and to at least keep them in mind when you take your day-to-day decisions. And I think there are ways to do this, right? The simple ways to do this will be, don't use plastic bags when you are in, or maybe to compost your food or reduce the amount of waste you throw. And those are the small things that you can do. But at the same time, you can also look at how not to waste your food or, things like that. But those are things you can do at home. What can you do, when you at your school level, at the community level? And these are things, and we challenge our youth to think about some of these issues. So again, I'll skip the videos because you can find them on YouTube. But one of the things that we do is this program called the Sustainability Champions Program, which all of you can take part in. And this year we're done with the programs, and next year you can take part in it. And these are students who work on products, campaigns that enable them to make a difference on the Sustainable Development Goals. So these two girls that you see in this picture came up with a takeout box where the cutlery is actually embedded in the top of the box. So you don't have to use additional plastic cutlery when you buy your food. But what you do is to just use origami, and you just fold the top of the box into a cutlery and that you can eat it. So students and young people are always able to come up with very new, very interesting ideas. So this last year, I had a group of students who worked on how to make leather out of orange peels. And that's a great way of using food waste, because we have so much of orange peels that comes out of our iJuice machines. So they were basically going to the iJuice machines and asking them for orange peels. We were grinding it up and adding some chemicals to it so that it could stay without rotting or without molding, and then converting it to usable leather that can be used for buckles and things, belts and things like that. Right. So here are some ways in which you can look at that you can do to be involved in what we're doing at the Science Center. So I'm going to plug again. So I already mentioned about the Sustainability Champion Program, where you can look at, and we work with you to make projects around the UN SDGs. But you can also take part in some of the other programs that we have. We have a Young Scientist Badge program where you can look at different kinds of sciences. We have an event that runs every year, which is called Untamed, which talks a lot about sustainability. But at the same time, please do visit our exhibitions from time to time. We change them quite a lot. And also come to the Science Center Observatory, which opens every Friday. So you can take a look at the skies through, I think, one of the first telescopes that was set up in Singapore. So that's just my last slide, and I know I'm slightly over time. So if there are any questions, we can take them.
I have a question. I mean, I find the work very fun and interesting because it's very meaningful. I want to ask if there are children who want to do the job you do next time. How do they get to where you are? What are the steps needed to get there?
Right. So there are many ways, actually. The first thing that you really need to do is be very, very passionate about science. And the second thing that you need to do is you need to be able to communicate well. So your English, because it's very important that not a lot of scientists are great at their science, but they are not very good at communicating the impact of science. So communication is one of the best, the most important things that you need to work in science communication. There are disciplines. In Singapore, if you go and study in the Faculty of Science in the US, there are modules that you can do, which are called science communication modules. And we look for those during which you're also trained to how do you present your work in front of an audience that is not scientifically literate. And that's a skill that you learn as well. In places like Australia, you have a Bachelor of Science Communication degree that you can study in. You would typically join as a science educator, who is a person who would either be in the Science Center exhibitions explaining the science, or you would be in a lab where you actually develop modules and lessons, as well as, little materials that you can use to communicate. Sometimes this is in the form of videos or online materials as well. So you would join as a science educator, and then you would work your way up from there.
Hi, Kiruthika. Yeah,
Hi.
thanks for coming on. Yeah, sharing with us. Would you like to share with everyone what got you interested in science?
That's a long question. What got me interested in science? I always like to say, maybe I can share with you what's my first memory of science. And it's a really funny story. So, okay, so when I was young, I was about maybe 3 years old, I think. I remember my dad used to have this little pot of saffron. So those of you who don't know what's saffron is a little red powder. So if you've ever visited an Indian temple, you would know that the priest would give you this little red powder. And the Indian women, and sometimes the Indian men, would put it on their foreheads. It has a little bit of a religious significance, right? So maybe. So my dad had this little pot of saffron. He used to keep it high up on the shelf. And what he would do every morning is he would take a pinch of saffron. It's a red powder, so it's a little bit like maybe baking powder or any of these things that you have in the kitchen. So take a pinch of it, hold it on the tap, all right, and then he would make it a little bit wet so that it can stick properly. And he'll stick it here, and then he'll just go off to work. And I was watching him and I said, poor dad, he has to every day open the tap, waste water, because he holds it on the tap and stuff. So I climbed up, I took a chair, I climbed up. It was quite high up for a 3-year-old. And I took down the saffron pot, then opened up the tap and made the whole thing wet and pasty. Now, I think, a lot of you can see where this is going. So when my dad found out, he went totally ballistic because, the whole thing sort of, when you add water to something and you leave it there, it doesn't stay pasty, it just gets caked up and kind of gross. So when he found out, I got into a fair bit of trouble, but I learned a lot about, okay, first I learned that I shouldn't climb people don't really like it when kids climb chairs and climb shelves and stuff, but I learned a little bit about materials and how they work and how they don't work. And I guess that kind of got me interested in exploring about things, even though I got into trouble. So I guess the first thing that got me interested in science was to think about things in ways that they shouldn't be thought about. So that you find better ways to do things. But in school, I think I was somewhat better at science than I was in other subjects. And my parents really encouraged me to work on science. So that played a big part as well. Okay, maybe there is a question in the chat, which is, does our PSLE science get in the way, or does it help sustain interest in science? I suggest that you take your PSLE science as a side step rather than as a main step towards learning science. So I have 2 daughters who went through PSLE, and there are places in PSLE science it's a bit frustrating because as all of you know, you kind of need to write your answers in a certain way or you would not get the grades, right? But I guess teachers were rather good because what I think the schools are looking for is not really the words, the keywords. That's a little bit of a misconception that we feel is there, that you have to use the right words. But what they're actually looking for when they say use the correct keywords is that, do you actually understand the concept? And are you actually able to explain the concept in the way it should be explained? So I'm not able to give a concrete example at this stage, but usually they have, okay, it's been a while since the kids got out of PSLE, but they've got this explain, okay, don't take my word for this. So you have to state why something, what is happening, why it's happening, and the why in a way should make sense. And as long as the why makes sense, the answer is marked correct, even if the keywords are not quite there. So when you're looking at your model answers, when you're studying for PSLE, don't take them for what they are, but kind of think a little bit about why they're written the way they are and what exactly is the difference between your answer and their answer. And it's certainly not the keyword. It's got something to do with the way the answer is expressed. Yeah. What's my favorite exhibit at the Science Center? There are quite a few of them, actually. I think it would be, the air cannon. I like that one. So if you go to the second floor, okay, actually you can't do that anymore because the exhibit is being revamped. But the one that I really used to like is this exhibit where it's a bit like a box, and then you knock the back of the box, and then somewhere far away there are these little pieces of metal that are hanging, and they start moving because the air from the box that you knock transmits to the little pieces of metal. Unfortunately, the exhibit is no longer at the Science Center, but I really like it because you can actually make it yourself with a trash can and a plastic bag, and you can use it to knock, little towers of paper cups that you can put in, and you can stand far away and say, "Hey, I'm using air to play billiards." But yeah, now the recent exhibits, my favorite exhibit would be the dancing magnets. That's been around for a long time. So if you go, you can look for it. You play music, and then the magnets kind of dance according to the music. They change the fields. So yeah, I like that one.
Who inspires you in science? Who are your heroes?
Ooh, who are my favorite scientists? Eric Kandel. He's a Nobel laureate who got the Nobel Prize in surprisingly physiology and medicine in 2001. The reason why he inspires me is he wrote this book called In Search of Memory, which is a great read. Some of the kids here are a bit young for it, but I think the parents can read it and perhaps share it with them. It's his journey from a child to the time he won the Nobel Prize. And his Nobel Prize was actually in trying to find, was because he found out how we, how do I put this? How we actually create memories using the neurons in our brain. So our brain is made of millions and millions of neurons, and they all work together to create the memories that we have, right? And he actually brought this down to a single neuron and how is memory created in a single neuron. It's absolutely beautiful because a lot of his work was done using this kind of snail, a specific kind of a sea snail, which is only 10,000 neurons. Now that sounds a little easy, right? So we've got billions of neurons and it's very complicated to study the interactions of billions of neurons, but you could study the interactions of 10,000 of neurons, but unfortunately not. And there are scientists that will work on a worm which has 300 neurons, and you still don't know how on earth it works. So it's actually quite complicated. But Kandel did a lot of work in the way a single neuron stores memory. That's one of the reasons why I like his work, because it's totally fascinating. But the other reason why I'm inspired by him is because he was a Jew who was from Austria, and during the World War II, his family got into trouble with the Nazis and the Holocaust and stuff, and they migrated to the United States. They were one of the lucky ones who were actually able to migrate, and a lot of his work also talks about, and his book also talks about how his Austrian roots helped him to become the scientist that he was, and that's a very, very inspiring story as well. So yeah, do read the book if you have time. It's called In Search of Memory.
What program do you use to code?
I use a lot of programs to code. I use Python, and sometimes I use R, which is a data language. I also use JavaScript, CSS, HTML, and things like that. Yeah. Do I have any other hobbies? Yeah, I do. I read quite a lot. I do a fair bit of sports. I go hiking during the weekends. Sometimes I do some art. So yeah, it really depends on what I feel like.
Well, I have a question. I'm very nosy. How do you think? What do you think our education landscape needs to improve on in areas of getting kids to love STEM more or to develop their STEM skills more?
I think we should not be afraid of making mistakes, and we should not be afraid to let our kids make mistakes. That's actually the only thing that's the most important, because one thing that we get stressed about, I think at least as parents, is the worry that our children will not do well in an exam, and then what happens. So I actually did this experiment with my own kids some time ago. So my older daughter, my kids are about 2 years apart, and so when my older daughter was in primary 5 and my younger one was in primary 3, I used to be, I was not a very stressed parent, but I still really wanted them to do well in school and in exams, right? So So at that point of time, I said, hey, you know, they were having the mid-year exams, and people were like, oh, are they studying? And P5 is really important because it's just before P6 and, you know, stuff like that. And then we just decided to try it out because you know, there's nothing to lose in this exam, even if you do really badly. And I know you're not going to do really badly. You might do somewhat badly, but not that bad anyway. So maybe I just don't tell you to study, and you do exactly what you want, and see what grades you get. And I want to see how much you can do without me pushing you, you know. And we tried it for both of them, and interestingly, they actually did just as well or even better than they would have if I had pushed them. So that kind of told me that, you know, maybe I just shouldn't push them, you know, just stand back and see what they do. And I've been taking that, well, at least I try my best to take that route. It's not always possible because, I mean, I'm a parent, but it helps. I think kids, if you give them this is just for the parents, kids, you don't really have to listen to this if you don't want to, but just for parents, if you just sort of let go a little bit, they kind of can figure their way out because I think they care. My daughter was telling me, because I'm part of our school's parent support group, and parents were, you know, kind of talking about the same thing. She's like, Mom, all you have to do is trust us. And she's a bit older and wiser now, I guess she can tell me things like this. So just have to trust us that we want us to do well as well. You know, it's not that you want us to do well, we want ourselves to do well. And so just let us do it our way kind of thing. So I guess just step back, let go, and let them feel, and that's fine. Yeah. How has science improved my life? I think it's given me everything I know, actually. So yeah, I guess my whole life is actually because of science.
I have a question. I'm also nosy. So are you a scientist like everywhere? Like now you're on holiday, do you like visit all the art science museums?
I do. I mean, we do a lot of museums, but we also do a lot of nature hikes and stuff like that. So you can learn an inordinate amount of stuff about science by going on, you know, like just looking at how different, like climate, for example, microclimates, how people live, tells us a lot about the way they are. So yeah, so not necessarily, but we do our share of science museums. And art museums. You learn a lot about science in an art museum because, you know, like how they preserve the art and express it and things like this. A lot of science there.